Okay, I think we can start.
Hello, Wiebke.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you.
Hello.
On a
Nice to
screen.
meet you, virtually meet you. Okay, so I maybe just, okay, hi, we can see you. So this is a very important, challenging session dedicated to maybe one of the questions that is at stake today when we talk about globalization. There's the question of emerging powers, and we will see if this is a new way of understanding the distribution of power in the world. You can imagine this like a counter-power, counter-hegemony, or just a new hegemony. So this is very important for us, for everybody, and I'm very pleased to chair this. We will have three speakers. So, Wiebke Keim, professor at University de Strasbourg, Leandro Rodriguez Medina, Universidad Alberto Hurtado de Santiago de Chile, and Sitas, professor at the University of Cape Town. So I will give the floor to Leandro.
No, Wiebke.
No, okay. No, Leandro is the first one.
Leandro?
Okay, are you ready, Leandro?
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, be ready because you have 10 minutes, more or less, 12 minutes, and at a quarter, another guest will be connected, Arisitas. He have only 15 minutes. So maybe you can speak just 10 minutes, and then we will wait for the other, or I will interrupt you, and you will also take the floor later. Okay, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Rigas and Grip and the organizers, Ari, Esteban, and the others, for this idea, which I find very... It's really great to have an entire day of reflection, 1 hour after an hour with people from all over the world, showing how much interconnected we are, even though we can talk about different topics. And I think that you did a great job assembling this group, and I'm very happy to join Wiebke and Ari later to talk about emerging powers. What I would like to mention, I don't know if 10 minutes may be too much, but I'm particularly interested in the challenge that emerging powers represent for science, technology, and we can call regime of knowledge, because I have a particular interest in circulation of knowledge. I started to reflect, even at the philosophical level, on epistemology, just because I wanted to understand why scholars and students in different parts of the world use categories produced elsewhere, but usually in the global north, to understand their own reality. That was my concern as a student in political science. Let me calculate 30 years ago in Argentina. And I was amazed by the fact that we were talking about Argentinian politics, but reading Robert Dahl talking about US democracy, or Giovanni Sartori talking about Italian political parties, or Spanish political scientists discussing, the parliamentary system. So I was shocked at the time as a student, because I was wondering why we have to read these guys to understand local politics. And starting from that moment, I was interested first in knowing if there were characteristics of knowledge, inherent properties of knowledge, of the knowledge produced in the global north that makes that knowledge better, that makes that knowledge true. And after several years and several research projects, I realized that it was more about knowledge circulation than epistemology or the epistemological foundations of knowledge. And to put that in a sentence, it means that some knowledge travel, other knowledges don't travel, remain local, remain for, cases, specific cases. So it could be knowledge about Peronism or Argentinian political system, yes, of course, but it was produced in Argentina for Argentinians. And the problem of traveling was even within Argentina. So if you were a student in Buenos Aires, you probably didn't hear anything produced in Rosario or Córdoba or Salta. So I was interested in this idea of knowledge circulation, but in particular to understand ourselves. So when many years ago, I was invited to join a group of scholars that probably Ari can talk more and Wiebke can talk more because they were involved in this project from the beginning about BRICS. I was interested by one question related to the rise of BRICS countries. And it was about knowledge production. It was about whether a new set of countries considered more and more important within the international scenario would be able to challenge the Western understanding of knowledge, the Western understanding of science and technology. And because of that, I'm related to the introduction, whether we are talking about a new hegemony or a new arrangement of global powers. I have no answer, of course. I guess you didn't expect that. But what I'm very curious, still curious, is whether these countries are, first of all, even interested in that. And that is important because I'm not saying that they are not. I know that they are. My point here is whether they consider that the discussion about knowledge regimes is crucial for the discussion about the distribution of power, or is a sort of peripheral debates. So they will have to fight, let's call it at the political level or the geopolitical level. Then they have to consolidate their power. And after all that, the conditions to produce new forms of knowledge, to circulate knowledge in different circuits, will be created. That could be one possibility, to create the geopolitical conditions and then to focus on, let's call it, epistemic conditions of knowledge production. The other alternative is to have these two struggles happening at the same time. And I think to some extent this is crucial because from what I learned from Wiebke and Ari's project is that many actors, I'm talking now about politicians, decision makers, chancellors of university, ministers of education, they are interested from day one to reorganize a little bit the networks, the global networks that are connected with knowledge production. And such organization or reorganization includes something that is very important, I think, from my point of view, is that at least some of them believe that they have to challenge this Western knowledge, let's call it Western knowledge, in order to understand themselves as actors in a new global scenario, which is interesting for me because it's the kind of similar question that I had as a student decades ago. Is it possible to be a global actor, to be someone with a global voice, if you are not able to think of yourself with categories that you produce, or at least you were able to contribute to some extent? And I think that BRICS and any other, let's call it, counter-hegemonic project has to have an epistemic dimension. has to have an epistemic dimension, because either as a socio-technical imaginary or the foundation of specific policies, they need to think of themselves as actors in a scenario, in a global scenario, in which they have a part as peer with other global powers like the US or Western Europe. And I think that one of the most interesting part of that reflection about how to become global power is what kind of contribution they will make to the way that the world see themselves, the different countries, the different regions, the different people, the different problems. So for me, it's not just including more actors, in this case, new countries into, the group of global powers. It's also how these new actors translate their views, their worldviews, their way of thinking about knowledge, their institutions about knowledge production into a more or less global network that challenges previous pre-existing networks. So when because of my research, when I see the power, for example, of Western European and US universities in any ranking in the world, even when, for example, in terms of papers produced, article published, China has become #1, and China is having an increased participation in any ranking, in university ranking, that creates, of course, a new scenario. But the very, for me, the interesting fact is, and what we will do with that, or what can we expect from that? We expect new knowledge. We expect different approaches to what society is, I don't know, economic production, culture, whatever. Or we are in a sort of quantitative race to produce more papers, to publish more books, to reproduce to some extent the Western understanding of science, technology, knowledge, and the world. And I think this is a different set of challenge, because if you ask me, I think this is something that cannot be decided by the big decision makers alone. I mean, it's not enough that the presidents or the leaders of this country want to challenge Western knowledge and want to produce alternative worldviews. It's not enough, because they have to trust and delegate much of that new understanding of the world into actors, different set of actors, a very diverse type of actors that at the end of the day, they cannot and they should not control. So they should believe, and I think this is a challenge for BRICS and for any hegemonic project, they should believe that they are just creating the conditions for new knowledge to emerge, to alternative forms of knowledge to emerge, and to be able to give the opportunity to these new actors to do what they do. They are the ones who produce knowledge. These are the researchers in universities, in national academies. These are the students who move from one country to another to see the world in different ways, or to see chemistry or anthropology in different ways. These are the actors that we need to take into account. So there is a process for me of what I would like to call epistemic decentralization that involves this network, this reconfigured network of actors, institutions, practices, infrastructures, technology, but just in order to create the conditions to think otherwise, to think of the world, of the ecological crisis, or the war, economic crisis in different ways. I'm not sure, I can't be sure whether BRICS is an effective way of reorganizing these global networks that for a long time were centered in northern institutions and northern countries. But what I'm pretty sure is that we can expect different forms of knowledge, differences in the way that we produce knowledge. Just because new actors will be able to exchange in a more peer situation with the global North powers in the near future. The result, I don't know. I really don't know. I would like to think that whether South African, Brazilian, Russian, Chinese, Indian institutions start to collaborate and start to take the others as peers in a project of global projection, in a project of what Mignolo calls global designs. If they are actually committed to new global designs, competing with the previous one, not just becoming a new hegemonic global design, but to be an alternative to previous global designs, I think the regime of knowledge could be deeply transformed in the following years. So I would like to stop here. I don't know, because of time, whether Ari will join now or later. I don't see Ari here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. And I'm just told that Sitas will be connected in 13 minutes. So I give the floor to Wiebke Keim. You have, Wiebke, 15 minutes, more or less. Thank you. Microphone, please.
Sorry, yes. So, yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to speak in this challenging marathon across the globe in 24 hours. So, yeah, let me maybe start from where I got to know Ari and how we came to work together on that BRICS project. So actually, I studied similar point of time as Leandro, same generation. So end of the 1990s at Freiburg University in Germany. And there was one professor at the time who passed away in the meantime, Hermann Schwenkel, who was in the German context one of the pioneers of globalization theory. And he came up towards the end of the 1990s with that concept of emerging powers. He even, just after I finished my studies, he even recruited me for a few months to put together a research proposal, European research proposal, framework program 7 at the time on emerging powers. That never succeeded, that proposal, but anyways. So he was one of those who started in the German and maybe even larger European context to coin that term, emerging powers. And he also launched the master's program Global Studies at Freiburg University together with South Africa, Durban at the time. It then moved to Cape Town. Ari took it to Cape Town. So it was Durban in the beginning in South Africa, Delhi in India, and they enlarged the program to include Flaxo Argentina, University of Bangkok. So it is a huge international master's program where students in cohorts move around, and there are quota allowed for students from each location to participate. So that happened when I was just completing my studies, unfortunately, but that's how I got to know Ari, because he was then invited as a visiting professor to Freiburg, which was also the starting point for my own PhD. So we started to work together from that point of time around globalization, broadly speaking, global studies in the stricter sense, emerging powers as well. And as Leandro, I took the way into the knowledge domain of globalization. So what does globalization mean at the level of knowledge? Is it a moment to overcome the strongly historically anchored Eurocentrism of the social sciences, and how could that happen, if at all? So this has been going on for the last 25 years now in my life. And I kept working with Ari throughout time. I met Leandro, who came as a visiting researcher to a project I was heading at the time at Freiburg, also on, the title was Universality and Acceptance Potential of Social Science Knowledge. So still, again, the question of how social science knowledge circulates, how theories, concepts that are developed in a certain geographical, historical, cultural, national context can be received elsewhere or not, what part is acceptable and what is declared to be not fitting and why, on what grounds, what enables the circulation of knowledge as well. That was the big topic of the project at the time. So that's how I met Leandro. So we've also been working on several chapters of that broader topic in the meantime. And then Ari, when he retired from University of Cape Town, became one of the members of the BRICS think tank council. So a group of academics that were brought into the position of being members of the BRICS think tank council by their own governments. So Ari, together with a colleague, I think from the Science Council in South Africa, a national scientist, joined that, and he was there for a few years, directed also the BRICS think tank council for some time, and we on and on exchanged on that experience that he had. And when he was moving out of the BRICS think tank council, he had a need to reflect more properly about that bit of hectic experience. So the chance was there to get him to Strasbourg as a Gutenberg fellow. So we applied for funding for a Gutenberg chair, and that's how he spent a bit of time at Strasbourg with us to work on that question of what does the emergence of the BRICS countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, at the time. In the meantime, it has become much larger, and I'm not able to speak about what has happened in the last 1.5 years because it's now a completely different endeavor again. So the idea was to get him to Strasbourg to reflect together on what happened. And what's the significance of all that is that finally a real instance of emerging powers that will also have an impact on the global knowledge domain or not, and if yes, to what extent and at what level. So we designed that project together. The idea was mainly also to engage colleagues from the BRICS countries, bring them together to Strasbourg for a bigger scholarly encounter, do interviews and group discussions with them when they come to Strasbourg. What then happened was a corona pandemic. So Ari had just arrived here, not even a month. He was here when the last plane to South Africa took him back, and then borders closed, and we had to work from a distance, which was a bit of a pity because certainly the project would have evolved very differently had we had the chance to travel, meet people in their own places of work, invite them to Strasbourg and engage on a much more personal level. But anyways, that's what it was. So we worked a bit differently. We still did interviews, but then on Zoom. And we put together a book to which Leandro Rigas and I contributed a collective chapter on changing knowledge regimes and from the Cold War and the development policy period up to now with the emergence of BRICS. There's also, of course, Ari did the bigger introduction and conclusions of the much broader theme, and we then focus more on the knowledge domain. I also did a chapter on invitation of scholars from BRICS to the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, so one of the big French social science institutions. Maybe if time allows, I can say a few things about that later. Two other publications also came out. One is a chapter that Ari and I wrote on the BRICS experience for a book that Leandro and Sandra Harding edited on decentralizing knowledges. So that was also based on the BRICS project, and there we looked in particular into how the BRICS countries invest into the BRICS Network University, so a big networked infrastructure, decentralized infrastructure of higher education institutions across the 5 countries at the time. So we analyzed mainly on the basis of documents because, as I said, the personal encounters and travel was not possible. We analyzed how that project came together, the political will behind creating a higher education and research landscape across BRICS. So the South, including, of course, Russia and China, so the South in brackets, if you wish, or something to be discussed. So we looked into the emergence of that BRICS Network University and analyzed what it achieved and what, until the time we wrote, could not achieve. And what was interesting is that indeed the financial investment was there, the understanding that something had to happen to connect the scholarly domains across the 5 countries. This understanding was there. It was put forth mainly, and that was maybe its strength and its weakness at the same time, was put forth mainly by states, heads of state and ministers of higher education and research who wanted that to happen. It had, until we analyzed the whole thing, had not yet become a really a project fully engaged by the academics. That was the impression we had. So we understood it, of course. We knew it would take time. So it's one thing to make money available and to show states, show ministries, show the will is there. But until academics really connect, find the right people to work with and come up with interesting knowledge production, knowledge circulation is a different story. So it's starting to happen, but was not yet fully convincing in terms of is there any significant alternative, in particular in the social sciences and humanities, that there was a bit of a question mark there. And then another thing that also happened, it's slightly related, is a chapter that Leandro and I wrote for a book called Non-Hegemonic Sociology, edited by Eric Massé. Stéphane Dufoy was also in the team that brought together that group of scholars, where we compared the experience of 2 social science journals, one that Leandro himself edited, Tapuya, Latin American STS journal, and one that I had worked on during my PhD, the South African Labour Bulletin. So a non-academic, or rather not exclusively academic, but also trade union related journal in South Africa. So we compared the 2 experiences as instances of decentralizing or counter-hegemony in the global knowledge domain. Yeah, so this is a different chapter sort of that I had in my mind when I came here today that I wanted to speak about. So the book based on the BRICS project is, we have received the reviews. They were overall very positive. A few revisions have to be made, and then the book should come out with Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa sometime next year. So we're very much looking forward to that. And I think for now I'd stop here. Would be nice to have Ari give us a broader frame to the whole story. But if you have any questions or
Thank you.
comments for us.
Thank you, Wiebke. Very, very interesting. So we have 15 minutes, and when I listen to your 2 presentations, a question comes to my mind. Many global sociologists or anthropologists, they use the major distinction between global north and global south. And they neglect, they forget that things are changing, and we are now witnessing the return of the strong division between West and Asian powers. And especially because East Asia is becoming maybe the major driver of the globalization. If we, in terms of demography, of military power, of cultural power, because they have a very strong cultural industry, and maybe also for other indicators. So my question is, why should we neglect this new position? This is, for me, maybe what is the main strongest phenomenon that we are observing. So this opposition between West and East is strong, but instead of working on this, we still continue to work on the division between global North and global South, just as South Korea is part of the global South, which is not the case anymore. If for some of us, China is still part of the global South, which is not the case. So what is your position about this?
Thank you very much. You know, seen from Latin America, it seems like Europeans are trying to attract us again to their binaries, you know. So for you, as you said, for many colleagues in the North, now it's not North and South, it's East and West. I agree that there are clear indicators of the rise of East Asian into the driver of a new phase of globalization. I don't like to discuss that. What I would like to discuss is whether the epistemic frameworks to understand that is not actually exactly the same that we are trying to challenge. So when I hear East versus West, or even North versus South, I'm actually not comfortable at all. When we talk about circulation of knowledge, we are talking about precisely that, moving knowledge that is transformed in the process of circulation. But at the same time, even if we take into account the West and East, or the North and South, we are particularly interested in the asymmetries involved in the process of circulation. So in my case, my answer is we can create as many huge devices as we like. We will still discussing how knowledge circulates between asymmetrical sites of knowledge production. And as long as we do that, I think we are somehow trapped in the same problem, which is the constant struggle between one site that becomes universal, basically because the conditions of production of that country, region, whatever, have become, hegemonic to some extent, and the rest of the world, I don't care if they are in the East, in the South, in the Moon, which actually have to accept the categories produced elsewhere to think of themselves. So my point is that I very much don't care how Europeans are thinking the world. I'm more interested in whether alternative forms of thinking the world can emerge and what conditions in the West, in the East, in the North, and in the South we have to commit to produce.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wiebke?
Yes. Well, I think those huge categories, North and South, just as East and West, we all know they are completely imprecise because they are too broad, because within the East, within the North, within the South, you have so many differences and differentials as well. I think they have just stayed with us because they are rather convenient shortcuts to speak about inequalities at the material level on the one hand, and at the level of visibility, mutual recognition, agenda setting power on the other hand. So it's just a shortcut, and whoever uses them, I think, is aware that it's not more than that. What I think the whole story around emerging powers is telling us now is the need to abandon a shortcut for binaries and rather speak about multipolarity. I'm not sure it is so new in the end. I think this has also been there quite for some time now, and even all throughout history. But I think that's an advantage of recognizing now that new powers are emerging or re-emerging, because even the idea of emerging is also short-sighted in terms of human history. So I think multipolarity is the right way to imagine how the world is connected today and what globalization looks like today, which does not at all resolve the issue of inequalities that persist. So when we say, whether we say East and West, but in the East, we don't think about Bangladesh, we don't think about Philippines, we think about India and China. So I think the issue of very important inequalities stays with us, will not go away, and that's what we need to work on. And there we need to distinguish at what level we speak about inequalities. Is it because funding power is not there? Is it because academic freedom is not there? Is it because other places are more interesting and people leave? Do they come back? And who has the agenda setting power to put issues that become fashionable or that become fundable or that attract students or that are publishable in whatever discipline we speak about, but in particular in the social sciences and humanities, which is the part of knowledge that I usually think about when I speak about knowledge, to be honest. Yeah, I think that's for me the important point. So we need to reconfigure some things, but not the essential problem of very big inequalities.
Thank you very much. You just confirmed my belief that we should never use this concept, this great frame, but a lot of our colleagues instead use them. So it's a question to have this, your light, and thank you for giving your answer. But I see that Rigas maybe want to react.
I wanted just to add, we had a session just 2 hours before where Johan Mouton was talking about the growth of African science. And he was mentioning the immense power of funding, private funding in Africa, and particularly Anglophone African countries of BMG and Wellcome, which are the main 2 funders of research today. In fact, the biggest funder in the world today of research are not anymore the countries, but BMG. And since it's the case that we enter in a new regime of production, and I think the BRICS wanted to use that opportunity. But they are not the ones where BMG goes. They are not the ones where the funders were the new funder that defined the new political economy of science are investing. And curiously enough, when the European Union, which has become a fundamental funder, is the 3rd biggest funder of research in Africa, is the European Union. In fact, and when I talk about, I mean about the Commission, no, it's not just not all the things, just the Commission's funding. You find that the roles that are inside the projects of Africans, in particular for what is biomedical research, is fundamentally funding clinical research. And so my question is, isn't there still the divide north-south there? Isn't the north-south divide not there, contrary to what my good friend Vincenzo is saying? Is it not a good example of maybe, if I was a little bit cynic, I would say the European funding for research in biomedical sciences in Africa is a way to keep the diseases that we are afraid of in Africa. So we fund the research that we should normally do, the clinical tests in Europe, we do them in Africa by African researchers, while we devise the medicine, we design the medicines in Europe, and maybe in a partnership with China or India, why not? India is today the 11th producer of medicine worldwide. Yeah, the 11th, much, much stronger than the European countries as such. So the point is, isn't there a real divide, which is north-south, not in the sense of a geography, but in the sense, so it could be east-west, and maybe it's a trap, as Leandro says, but in the sense of an equal partnership in the agenda setting, as Wiebke was just mentioning. Just to put the ball again in the game.
Sure. So you have maybe you want to reply?
I agree with Riga.
Okay.
We are friends and
This is
We should do a
fantastic.
project together again.
It's a global agreement. No, maybe Wiebke, you started to talk.
Well, just to say that I'm medical research is really not my domain. So I'm learning from Rigas, because these things I have no idea, and you need also figures, empirical data to make an argument, which I don't have at all in that domain. But what he says to me makes a lot of sense. So I do think, indeed, maybe at some level the South-North distinction, speaking about Europe, the European Union, as a sort of unified research landscape vis-a-vis Africa, which is also a particular way to put South and North in a position. Maybe at that level it works, yeah. Wouldn't surprise me.
So that is still not there. I have another question. Yeah. Is the BRICS not, I mean, it's a submarine of the Russians, of the Chinese or the South African tried to modify it. The constitution of a research group of social sciences inside the BRICS consortium was an invention that was very much promoted by South Africa. And there is something very interesting there, that is maybe the very large power of China and India and le pouvoir de faire du mal de la Russie, how you say that in English? The power of doing...
damaging power.
Yeah.
Ruining.
Of Russia, do not really fit in an agreement. Whereas South Africa needs the agreement to belong to some new hegemonic center. And are we not, when we enter into this game, are we not, comment on dit les complices in English? The accomplices, I mean, you know, when you do a murder and you participate, not directly. Yeah. Are we not playing, and are we not part really of that? I have to give you a parallel, I have the impression that we are exactly in the position when anthropologists, French anthropologists, were working in the colonies in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. They were not there to strengthen the colonial power. Colonial power was there, but they participated to the management of the colony. Are we not engaged into the same thing when we work in the groups that are defined by the BRICS consortium?
You see, this is where it became complicated to work all online. I think had we traveled and met people over a coffee, the story would look very different from analyzing documents and speaking to people on Zoom and record the Zoom interviews. I think the story is very complex. So there are some things that are more in the domain of diplomacy. So people who are officially appointed into some sort of position, and then they have a certain role to play, which is volatile because governments are changing. So from the beginning of BRICS until now, you had Modi, you had Bolsonaro, you had Lula again. I mean, so the official story also changes depending on who is in power in each 4 or 5 year period, with Russia being quite stable from the beginning, but the other places, China as well, but the other places are much more volatile. So whom are you speaking to is not so easy. I imagine Ari somehow told us he should have written an ethnography of those meetings, how they come together in big halls. Political establishment is there, and then the minions behind them who actually start to speak when the big ones move out of the room, shake hands, go, and then the sort of smaller people who are there around as well from the 5 countries start to engage in different sort of discussions. So I think many things are going on. It's very difficult to get a complete picture. What I could observe, at least for the social sciences and humanities, and that was interesting, was on one hand, the sort of official BRICS structures were put into place, mainly funding. And there you could observe that it was not so easy to bring teams together from scratch to do significant, substantial work. What also happened, though, is that the emergence of BRICS and the mere label BRICS allowed for other things. For instance, in the International Sociological Association, you have a BRICS working group of colleagues who met rather spontaneously during the congresses of the International Sociological Association, and they formed a rather stable working group, not fully stable either. They have done a few things. For instance, they published together a book on youth in the BRICS countries, which is interesting, with contributions from the 5 countries. And they spoke about the editorial process and how they try to not streamline the whole project, but keep significant differences in scholarship between the 5 countries in the book, these kinds of things. Where they have the big difficulty that China is not a national association affiliated with the International Sociological Association because of the question with Taiwan. So Chinese colleagues are there, but individually, not as part of their national association, which makes things also, again, diplomacy here, very complicated for them to get organized fully under the umbrella of the ISA. But yeah, so the existence of BRICS as a label allowed for other things happening alongside that are not really under the radar of the official establishment. There's also interesting things going on, and Ari could speak about that more on the artistic side, so links between social sciences and artistic creation. They put together a music ensemble between not only South Africa, but the whole of Southeast Africa, because Ari also, from the beginning, said if South Africa is part of BRICS, the role is also to establish bridges with the rest of the continent. So they put together that music ensemble that is both historical musical research and musical production, together with colleagues from India, Pakistan, and now China. And they, it's one example, they wrote a big piece on 15th century story of two giraffes who were shipped from Southeastern Africa to India and were there discovered in a zoo by some Chinese noblemen who then took them to China. So they wrote that story of circulations and, if you want, South-South connections in history before or outside of any colonial, Euro-dominated and so on story, which is also very interesting. And that could also happen because channels were open, the awareness was there that something could happen between those countries, and it's happening. For the social sciences, I think IPSA is maybe, according to the colleagues from Brazil and South Africa and India, IPSA is the more interesting connection. So India, Brazil, South Africa, which also puts also an alliance that puts funding into place. And apparently these countries with a shared colonial history and connect more easily and more fluently than the bigger consortium that includes Russia and China as well. So there's many things going on, and BRICS was just one example to speak about that emerging multipolarity and the redirection of flows between regions that we believe have been less connected earlier.
So the question is maybe one that Vincenzo is trying to manage also in his work on cosmopolitanism. Also, is there finally a very different distribution of knowledge and cultural activities, very different from the political and economic powers? It does not depend upon the same variables. It doesn't have the same consequences. And so the label can be used of BRICS, for example, can be used as a mover in the case of music and in the case of science, but not in the case of politics and international relations. Well, that was what the grip was about.
Yeah.
Well, I think no political power can fully control in the end what the academics will do. We know it from Europe. I mean, the whole European funding frameworks were put into place to strengthen the European Union. What comes out in terms of, at least in the social science and humanities, is often research that is very critical of Europe and of the European Union, which was not planned for, but that's how it goes. So once you allow for those connections, you're not sure about the outcomes, which is something we spoke about yesterday in class with Leandro, by the way. It's a different story. Yeah.
Leandro, you want to add something?
No, I totally agree with the idea with things. The first is the idea that BRICS is more a label to observe some fractures, some disruptions, and see what happens, and not necessarily to be totally aligned with the political project of these 5 states, or 7 or 8 or any group of countries. But the other thing that is important for me is, going back to Riga's comment, is if the conditions of production are changing,
yeah,
or will be able to be changed or challenged. From Chile, where I'm at now, from Mexico, where I lived for 20 years, BRICS doesn't seem to be powerful enough. so far. And this is also important because it creates some expectations. And if nothing happens, and I'm not saying that this is the outcome, but if nothing happens, it's another attempt to challenge some sort of hegemonic knowledge or regime of knowledge, and sort of, I don't know how to call this illusion with the alternative. And I think that is important, that something emerged and something is produced from this interstices, as Wiebke mentioned now. And the other thing that makes me think very much is what Riga says about anthropologists and whether we are now doing the dirty work of new emerging powers that at the end of the day want the same that the US or the British Empire before, maybe China or even Russia. So I don't know that. I can't answer Riga's issue, but I think that the way that we have now history to see what happened with these anthropologists, what happened with these disciplines, how they are still dealing with this, the kind of consequence, epistemic but also ethical consequences of this. I think it's a call to pay attention to some sort of blind commitment to any political project, no matter how alternative or counter-hegemonic it may sound, is a political project. And as academics, we have to be critical even of the platform and infrastructure that we ourselves create or are committed to, because, these emerging powers are powerful enough to enroll actors, even though they may think of themselves as autonomous, free, and so on. And at the end of the day, we depend on money and infrastructure as much as any other worker in the world. So I appreciate Riga's concern with the role of intellectuals, academics, scholars, researchers. We should be very concerned with our involvement in political projects like this one.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting to have your point of view from Latin America. And as I live in Europe, maybe my point of view is a bit different. Well, it depends on what you want to see, indicators. For a European sociologist working on the global circulations of imaginaries, East Asia is strong enough. Mm-hmm. East Asia is strong enough, to spread a new visions of what love is. Look at the importance of the spread of the K-drama, the Korean TV series in the world among young people. They are very consumed in Latin America, even before they started to arrive to Europe. So they are very spread in Middle East, in India. So the circulation was from south-south, from south to south, and then from south to north. And in that case, we cannot deny that for the global generations today, for my students, your students, there are some frames that are the same, and the ideas they have, the code of love that they are used to see today, to watch, comes not from Western society, from Hollywood comedies, or from British chick lit, or the French romance, but comes from East Asia. So if you look at this, we live today in a multipolar world. And the idea that Arjuna Padurai put forward 30 years ago, the idea that the United States are not anymore the central players of the global landscapes of imaginaries, this idea is much more relevant as truth today than when Padurai put forward. It had this vision. It was a pioneer, which is fantastic. Few people in the world was able to do this. Karl Marx, Alexis de Tocqueville, and maybe Padurai. So if you look at the knowledge and the academy, I completely agree with you. But for other indicators of the global circulation, I don't mention Japan and the very strong importance of Japan in pop culture. I don't want to mention the future and especially Chinese investment in soft power through cultures, and especially in Global South. So my question was not to replace the division between North and the South, because it's, it's now, how do you say, it's caduc, it's ephemeral, it's finished. No, I just want to see that in the distribution of power, if you talk about the emerging counterpowers, from this point of view, East Asia is very strong enough from a European sociologist. But okay, this is just what I can see from my point of view. Just to finish, you know the famous sentence by Antonio Gramsci, the Italian thinker. He said once in a letter, I'm pessimistic by intellect and optimistic by will. So what is your opinion now? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the global knowledge? You have 3 minutes.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I'm always optimistic if knowledge circulates. So whatever we can do to create a condition for knowledge to circulate as much as possible, I'm optimistic. I don't see this is the current situation in many countries, in many regions. We are facing huge problems for academic freedom, for knowledge circulation in general. But I'm always optimistic. I think it's a Latin American disease.
Well, I think I would like to make one comment on Leandro's doubt about whether if the BRICS do not come up with any significant alternative, then there will be disillusion about that alliance. I think we can also see differently. Imagine in 25 years we meet again, we come up with an ideal situation where knowledge circulates fluently, everybody has the same options, opportunities, infrastructures in place, people like each other. And maybe the outcome will be that finally the knowledge produced will not be so significantly different from what we had. But that option to recognize that in the end, what we produce is maybe not so substantially different from what others produce, we can't get there now, because until we stop, we come to an end of those huge inequalities that are very deeply inscribed in the knowledge system, we cannot have the discussion. So how generic can we become, how universal can our theories, categories be? This debate is not possible now. But imagine once we get there, then maybe it will not be disillusionment, but just agreement that finally in the end we can work all with the same, similar kind of knowledges.
It's time to finish. Thank you very much for this very meaningful presentations. Thanks again. And we can move to the other session. Thanks again. See you.
Thank you.